Okay, so let's look at page 66A and in the booklet here. And we went through 3 points that makes the distinction between the process of Yesh Ayin and Ilu V'Olu. Number one point was that Yesh Ayin is a process that the Yesh does not exist in its source at all. In fact, that's why it's called Ayin. Means it doesn't exist in the source, not in an actual way. Potential for it in the source, there's absolutely nothing there that we can say this is the beginning of this yesh. The yesh does not exist in its source. Ilav olo is not like that. Ilav olo means that the olo, which means the outcome, what is being created, already existed in the source in some sort of potential way. We gave a few examples. Another point was that, therefore, based on this, Yesh Ma'ayim means that it's actually a new creation, because what's here now was not here before, not here actually, and not here in potential. Ilav olo is not, even though it's something new that was just created, but in essence, it's not totally new. It's not an absolute newness. It already existed, but in a potential state. And true, when you say potential, there can be many sort of levels, even in potential. But when we say yesh mi'ayin, it didn't exist, means it didn't exist in any way that's potential. I mean, to use an example, which is brought down of Siddur, if you have a hot coal, you know what a hot coal is? Gachelet. Gachelet. That was a gachelet. Gachelet is a hot coal, like you barbecue, you have coals on the thing. So this is hot, but there's no gachelim.
Yeah.
So the coal has it in a flame, but there is no flame. The fire is inside. So what if you want to be a flame from the coal? How do you make a flame? How do you create a flame? Right, you make a wind, you blow on it, and the flame comes out. So it means there was fire inside, and when I blow on it and the fire comes out, it's not a new creation. The fire was already there before. But before it was hidden. When I blow on it, now it comes out on the open. But let's take another example of potential. A stone. We call it here in English a flintstone. Flintstone is a stone that if you strike it with a piece of metal, a spark comes out. That's how Adam Harishon created fire in the beginning of creation. So, is there any fire inside the stone? No. It's not like a hot coal. A hot coal, if you touch it, you burn yourself. You put it in water, the water will extinguish it. But a flintstone, you don't burn yourself, water won't do anything. But there has to be some sort of potential for fire inside the stone. Otherwise, why would fire come out? And how come when I go like that, how come plastic doesn't come out? Or rubber doesn't come out? Or a piece of wood doesn't come out? Must be there's something in it which is the source of fire. But that something is a very, very hidden potential. But still, something already existed. Hashem created the stone with the potential that if you strike it, there'll be fire. So that would be Ilav olo. So even though the fire is something new, but it's not absolutely new, it already existed in the stone. Yesh mi'ayim means that it didn't exist in the source at all. There's nothing there. Not potential, over nothing. And therefore, when it's created, it's absolutely new. Then we came to the third point, which on this page is D, I'm skipping C, so we'll get there. That because of that, the yesh cannot exist without the constant support of the ayin, without the constant support of the creating force, because the yesh has no substance whatsoever without the source. So as long as the source continues to sustain it, it exists. If it would stop for a second, it becomes non-existent. But ilu v'olu could exist without the source. Why? Because in essence, it already has its own identity separate from the source. It was just inside the source. But now it comes out on its own. It's not totally new. So it continued to exist without the support of the source. The one thing we didn't talk about is C, this part. All of this is in this part of the minor. After I explain it, we'll go in and see all the four things. What is C? In the process of creation of yesh mi ayin, in order for the ayin to, so to speak, to create a yesh, the ayin conceals itself. Because if the ayin would be revealed, there's no room for yesh. Ila ba'olu is the opposite. In order for the ila to create the olu, the ila has to come close to the olu and sort of reveal itself, expose itself, and apply itself. And the more it does, the more successful will be the process of the outcome. Let's take an example. That's what we said the other day, that a teacher and a student is also ilav olu. Teacher has an understanding of a certain subject, and I'm teaching it to the student, so now the student has it in their head. That's something new. But in order to be successful, it's not by the teacher removing themselves or hiding themselves, just the opposite. The more the teacher applies themselves to the student and applies themselves to the student's ability and capacity to understand and explains it to the student in that way, the better the student will get it. And the student has to apply itself to the... So the creation of ilav comes from the closeness of the source and whatever is being created. Let's say seichel amidas. In order for intellect to create emotion, the intellect has to apply itself to emotion. In other words, I have to think about a certain subject. Let's say a person is going to think about something which will make them love Hashem. So first they think about what Hashem is doing, that Hashem saved my life, or Hashem gave me this, or Hashem gave me that. And then in the brain, there has to be a conclusion, and therefore I should love him. So in other words, in the brain, you have to connect it to the emotion, and the more the intellect is connected to emotion, the more effective it'll be. There are people, by the way, who are very intellectual, very academic. They know everything, we're as cold as ice, and what they understand has no effect on their emotions, because they're not connecting. So intellect and emotion, the opposite. The intellect has to apply itself and connect itself to the emotion. And the more the heart feels what the head understands, the more the heart will respond. Let's take an artist who has the power of art. He has the potential for art, and they make an actual picture. So the potential in my hand to draw a beautiful picture is the ila. The picture on the canvas is the olu. So the more I apply myself, which means I take a pen and I bring it close to the paper and I draw, that's going to make it happen. If I take away the pen, I put my hand behind my back, nothing's going to happen. Yesh mi ayin is the opposite. The way the ayin creates the yesh is by the ayin withholding itself, hiding itself from the yesh, because the ayin is infinitely different than the yesh. And if the ayin would be exposed, there's no, in the realm of ayin, there's no place for yesh. I know it's a complicated concept, but try to think about what I'm saying. So let's say, for example, we say something spiritual is the ayin, create something physical. Creating the physical means that there has to be a concealment and holding back of spirituality and allowing a new kind of creation to be created. But if it would be just, that's why usually when you talk about tzimtzum, that's what tzimtzum means. It has to be hidden and concealed and held back in order for the yesh to be created. So let's look inside now to see these 4 points that we just said. Now we'll soon see why he's saying all this. Good morning. So I have chesed and glory. I have cold water and I have hot tea. Okay. Page 61. Hine in Yimbriya Yesh Me'ayin. What is Yesh Me'ayin? What is the concept of Yesh Me'ayin? Shadover HaMishave, no, Dover HaMahave, the creative force, Mistater has to hide itself, conceal itself, the Pchinas Dover HaMishave, from the creative being. Says, Zehu HaHefresh, this is in fact the difference between the Shtalshus, the Pchinas Bri Yesh Me'ayin. The difference between the Shtalshus, which is Ilav Olul, and Yesh Me'ayin. In the Shtalshus, Sha'olul Masig or Ilav Shaloi. In the case of Ilav Olul, the Olul, the creative being, is connected to its source and feels the source. And that's how it comes into creation. Like we showed in the that's why it's called a chain. Just like in a chain, the link, the lower part of the top link is connected to the higher part of the lower link. So it means the bottom link is connected to the higher link in order to hold on. Spiritually, it means that like a seichel and midas, the midas have to receive from the intellect and be connected to the head in order to respond emotionally. But in the case of Yesh Me'ayin, in the Pchinas Ayin means Einay Musik Klal. The Yesh can't comprehend, can't understand, can't relate to Ayin. Shazel Pirush Me'ayin, that's what it means, Ayin. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means Einay Musik. That the Yesh sees no connection to the source where it comes from. So like us, for example, here in this physical world, do we feel our source? No, that's why there are people who unfortunately don't believe in Hashem and the Creator. What do they feel like? We just came out. That's it. We're just here. Because that's Yesh Me'ayin. You don't feel the source. So for example, in all the spiritual worlds, every world feels how it comes from a higher source. But Yesh Me'ayin, we don't feel that. In Yesh Me'ayin, the ayin is not felt by the creative being. If the creative being would feel its source, what would happen? And if the source would be exposed, there would be no room for something physical to be there. Because the source is a different kind of existence. And in that world, in that realm, there can be wood, and there can be paper, and there can be steel, or there can be any other physical substance. So the conclusion is, every physical thing that is created from its spiritual source has to go through the two processes. First, mishtalshel, it has to evolve. Revavis, madreges, ishtalshelus, has to go tens of thousands or millions of levels of evolvement. And that's like ilav olu. So that's one level, brings another level, and those are connected to each other. And they're all in the spiritual realm. But achakach, after that, mis'alam and adava mizhava, the source becomes hidden, and something new happens. Something new becomes created that's totally new and never existed in the source. And so based on this, we can understand even if we were to say, remember we said there's some that they say, oh, the world, it does really is no world, it's just Hashem. No such thing. The world isn't exist. It is a true entity. If you wouldn't say that the world is a true entity, then what was created in Sheish Liberations? Page 62, 63. If one were to say It only appears to us that there's a world, but in reality, nothing was created. And came Maush Akosav. So what does it mean when it says Bereshis Bara? Hashem created. Nothing was created. It only appears like that. It's almost like a figment of our imagination. But in the Torah it says Hashem did create a world. We must say Hashem created something physical. We don't really need proof, but he says to bring some sort of proof. Look at what our sages say. There's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin that says like this, talks about the laws of what we consider. We know that according to Torah, you're not allowed to practice black magic, sorcery. Shnayim leiktim kishuyim. There are two people that are collecting cucumbers. Echad leiket. One is collecting cucumbers, but he's doing it through sorcery. Chayiv. This person will be guilty and he'll have to have a certain punishment because he's violating a commandment in the Torah. V'echad leiket, there's another person that's also doing something like that. He's collecting cucumbers, also in some sort of not regular way, but he's not chayiv. What's the second person? Oisa Maisa, the one who actually uses sorcery, chayiv. Eichas Hanayim potter. Eichas Hanayim means that he's just doing something. What do we call it in English? When something looks like it's a certain way, but it's really not. Optical illusion. So when you have a magic show and magicians are doing magic and they put somebody in a box and they cut him in half, it's not real, but they do something in such a way that it looks very real. So you're not allowed to perform magic. You're not allowed to perform sorcery. But if someone does something that only looks like it, then he's put. So he says, if we were to say that the world is really a non-existent entity, so why, if somebody does something that looks like it, is not considered magic? The whole world is all about looks like it. The whole world is really just an optical illusion. So what is this different than that? Then it's real. That's our reality. So the answer is no. Our reality is very real. There is a world that was created and it exists. And therefore, someone who does something which is only an optical illusion, that has no substance. But if I were to say that the whole world is one big optical illusion, and that's the reality of our world, that if a person does something through not magic, but a certain trick, that's also like an optical illusion, that should be considered like sorcery. What's the problem? It's not real. The whole world is not real. So clearly, even according to Torah and even according to Chassidus, there is a world that was created by Hashem that is absolute true existence. But the understanding is that every single detail of all the creation in the world of Bria, in the world of Yitzira, in the world of Asiya, everything, it has a root l'mayla. So first it comes from its source, the derech hashtalshus hamadregas has to evolve. And then comes the process of yesh mi'ayin, which means shebchinas hamahava mistatim and adobra hamizhava. And the thing that was created, thing that creates, the force that creates has to hide itself from the object that's being created. Because if the force that creates it would become revealed, then it would become nothing, because if the source is revealed, then the created thing can't exist. And it brings an example of that. Gama Malachim, there's a story in the Medrash about the angels. Shem Sichlin of Dolim. Angels are the highest form of creation. In fact, they're referred to as they're the Sichlin of Dolim, means like they're just as if to say an entity of pure logic. These are the greatest creations in the world. Hashem created heaven and earth, and created stars and constellations and the moon. Hashem created mountains and oceans. But the highest thing in creation are the angels. Aleihim Nemar, in reference to them, it says, Magodlu Masecha. Like you said before, how big is your creation? When he says how big, what is it referring to? The angels. The sages tell us there was a story where the angels did something and Hashem was not pleased with it. What did Hashem do? Hashem pointed his small finger, the serpent that got burned. Maybe this is where all the movies come from. Hashem went like this, and they all got burned. What did that mean? It went like this, they all got burned. Kirish, it means like this. When Hashem created angels, they're huge. They're on a higher level. They're infinitely greater than humans, than animals, than mountains, than the sun, than the moon, than the stars. But they also have a certain capacity. So Hashem creates them. So let's say in humans, he puts in 2 ounces of godly life. And in the angels, he puts 10 tons of godly life. But 10 tons, not 100 tons. When the time came for these angels to no longer exist, what did Hashem do? He revealed just one little bit more than what they could handle, and revealed to them their source more than what they could see. And the moment that was revealed, they became non-existent. So the whole world could not exist. It only exists because Hashem's ayin is concealed. If it would be revealed, it couldn't exist. Want to say something? Yeah.
So, for Mashiach and times, whenever Hashem's light is revealed, it's still going to be a concealment of some sort, because then we couldn't
Right. So there actually is a medrash that says, and it's related to the next week's parsha. Next week's parsha says that Avraham Avinu was not well because he did bris milah. Right? So he was very weak. What did Hashem do? He knew that Abraham runs around hosting guests. He didn't want him to do that, so Hashem made it very hot outside. So hot that people can't walk outside. Nobody can walk outside. He has no people to host. But then he took it so much to heart that Hashem sent 3 angels. How did Hashem make it so hot? You remember what it says in Rashi? What? Right, that the sun has a shield. And Hashem took the sun out of the shield. And when he did that, it got very hot. As if to say, if this would be, let's say, a different kind of, not a transparent cover, but a darker cover, and that would block that a light that's very brilliant shouldn't blind us. But if you take it away, it'll be blinding. So the sun is very hot. That's a simple meaning. There's a medrash that says about certain things, if you do this or you do that, the reward will be that when Mashiach comes, Hashem will take the sun out of its shield, and that'll bring healing to the world. But it says like this, the tzaddikim will be healed. The wicked will be destroyed. So what does that mean? It means the sun represents Hashem. The shield represents the tzimtzum that blocks Hashem's light. Shouldn't be too bright. When Mashiach comes, Hashem's light will be able to be revealed to some degree. The only thing is, tzaddikim who are able to absorb it, they'll become greater through it. The wicked who can't absorb it, they'll disappear because of it. So you're asking a question, why wouldn't tzaddikim also disappear? So obviously it's not going to be revealed in a full way, because in a full way, no one could exist. So it means it's revealed, but it's still some degree of concealment. And in fact, when Mashiach comes, we're constantly going to be growing in the level of godliness that's being revealed. But if the actual source is revealed completely, then we couldn't, in a certain way, we wouldn't be able to exist. Yeah.
Isn't the status of the tzaddik very, very hard to reach? Right. So most of us are wicked. So what does that mean for most of us?
I protest. Yeah. No, all of us are tzaddikim. Amech kulum tzaddikim. All tzaddikim. When it says wicked in this context, it means wicked, evil, wicked people who do evil, like terrorists and murderers and all of these kinds of people. Tzaddikim here is used in a loose way, meaning Just anybody that's lives the right way, does the right thing. Yes. Right, much more revealed than down here. And they can handle it because there's no physical body, so the soul can handle much more. But they also have a certain level to what they can handle. And they keep growing in that. Then came, after we understand all this, we come to the conclusion that Gam be'es asher einem is Gam. So again, if the source would be revealed, then the creative thing would be gone. So that means the only reason why it's here, because the source is concealed. If that's the case, Gam be'es einem is Galos, even when it's not revealed, Hareim nimtzoyim liyesh b'davar, even though they exist, but their existence is not true. Again, not true doesn't mean that it's a figment of our imagination. It means their existence is not credited to them, it's credited to their source. Because if that source would for one moment become revealed, they'd be gone. So they're only existing because the source is there and it's hidden. Another source in Torah that shows us this principle. What's the principle? The principle is that if something is dependent totally on something else, then even when it does exist, it's not a true existence. The Gemara says, first of all, let me just give the introduction. Reference to certain things. One of them is mechatas, which means there's a mitzvah in the Torah that there's a time when you have to use mechatas, means you have to do the red heifer, paraduma, the red heifer. Part of the process is taking water from a wellspring, and the term in the Torah, it has to be a live wellspring, living waters. That's why the video is called Living Waters. It comes from these words in the Torah, Mayim Chayim. That's why they have seltzer, which is called Mayim Chayim, but it's not the same thing. So, the Gemara says, what does it mean, living waters? Well, what does it mean water is living? The Gemara says it has to come from either a river or a wellspring that lives. It doesn't dry up. If it dries up, it's considered not alive. What does dry up mean? What if it runs and flows for years and years, and once in 100 years it dries up? That's not a problem. So what is a problem? So the halacha is, if it flows constantly without any interruption for 7 years, and never dries up in less than 7 years, it's considered living waters. Because 7 years in Torah is a complete cycle. So the waters that don't dry up are called Naharas HaMechazvin. What does Mechazvin mean? Shemechazvin Achaz B'Shavua. It dries up once every 7 years. Achaz B'Sheva Shonim. Arei Psulim, these waters are disqualified for Mechatas. Why is it disqualified? Right now, the water is living, it's flowing. Nipsing being that once in 7 years it does get interrupted, it discontinues, that means even when it's flowing, it's not really live waters. That's the same idea. That if our life and our existence depends on the ayin, and if the ayin would be revealed, we could no longer exist. So even when we do exist, the existence doesn't belong to me, but it belongs to my source. Somehow I always like to use the mushroom, the wind and the paper. Just we can relate to that a little bit better. And you can imagine it. Or imagine something is on the water. You put something on the water and it's moving. It moves for miles. Is it really moving or the water is moving? The water is flowing, and this is sitting on the water. So it moves with the water, but it's not a moving object. I'm not talking about a boat that you're moving in the oars or something. I'm talking about putting something down on the water, and the water is running in a certain direction, and this moves with it. No, they say, how do you know the difference between dead fish and live fish? They're both in the water, and they're both moving. So how do you know if it's dead or alive? That's one way, of course. The other way is, if the fish are only moving in one direction, which is with the current, then it's dead. And they can fly against the current, then you know that they're alive. Which means if they're moving with the current, they're not really moving. The water is moving. And they're in the water, so they're also moving, just like the wind is blowing a piece of paper. And that's the point he's making. If something can't exist without a source, that means that even when the source sustains it, its existence doesn't belong to itself, but to the source. So this is the main point. Whenever Chassidus talks about Bittul, there's no world, everything is Hashem, all this doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means it exists and doesn't belong to itself, it belongs to the source. And that's what we mean when we say it's not a true existence. And they tell the story with a chassid that he had a friend, a chassid who owned a grocery. He walked in and he bought eggs, and he bought bread, and he bought juice, and he bought milk. And he started to walk out. And the owner of the grocery says, "Hey, where are you going? You didn't pay me." He says, "I learned in Chassidus that the whole world is nothing. And therefore, if it's nothing, I didn't take anything, I have to pay you." He says, "Well, I'm sorry. I believe what I learned. The world is nothing." Anyway, he schleps him to the road. And the Rabbi saw who he's dealing with. So the Rabbi had a whip hanging on his wall. So he said to him, "You better put the nothing back on the shelf in the nothing. Otherwise, I'll ask my nothing to take the nothing that's hanging on the wall and give it to you over the nothing." In other words, whatever you're saying is nothing, we'll take care of you with nothing. So what does it mean? And the answer is, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Otherwise, Torah, mitzvahs, and everything would be not true. It means it exists and doesn't belong to itself, but it belongs to the source. So we'll take the same principle. I would say, just say, Shis Alpha Shnei Alma, the world exists for 6,000 years. And after that, everything will sort of be gone. That means that the world also is like this water. It only exists for 6 million years. But the seventh, which is the last part of the cycle, it discontinues. Page 67. So therefore, even when the world does exist, it's not a true existence. Hashem, at any moment, Hashem could reveal himself and reveal his creative force. And in that moment, as if it's revealed, then instantly it becomes nothing. In other words, revealing the creative force means we'll see openly there's nothing else exists besides Hashem. You won't even see a created object. And this is what the Rambam writes on the pasuk of Hashem on the Kimemis. The Rambam writes these words. What's interesting, the Rambam was written before Chassidus, and it's not a book of philosophy, it's actually a book of halacha. But the Rambam writes a concept which is really a purely Hasidic concept. That it means Hu levadei ha'emes, Hashem is the only real truth. Vein lacha emes, nothing else is true like He is true, and that's what ein noid levadei means. Shein sham emes motzim levadei kamoisei, nothing exists that's true like He's true. Meaning to say that the truth of creation is Hashem, not the creation itself. Yeah.
So going back to sorry, I thought you were going to say something along the lines of the Malachim are moving against or with the current only, because they're so nullified in Hashem's existence versus like man not move against the current.
No, what I want to bring out with the current is something else. That when something moves with the current, it means it's not really a movable object. It's not really a moving object, but it's moving. So even though you can't deny the fact that this is moving, the piece of this fish was here now, and 2 minutes later it's 10 feet away. So it's moving. They say, but not the fish is moving, the water is moving. So the movement is not attributed to the fish, but to the water. The piece of paper was here on Eastern Parkway, and there's a strong wind blowing. So 2 minutes later, it's on Empire Boulevard. So it's moving. And you say, no, this piece of paper is not a movable object, not a moving object, but it moved. The answer is, the movement is not attributed to itself, it's attributed to the wind. Same thing here. The table doesn't exist. It does exist. There's a table. But the existence of the table is not attributed to itself, but to the ayin that creates it.
What about, is that the same? Also not when?
The truth is, spiritually, every source is dependent on the higher source. So to a certain extent, you can go on and on and on. So you say the physical is on here because of its spiritual source, but that source only because of the higher source, and the higher source because of the higher source, and so on. But in the process of Ilu B'Olu, it's not so much like that, because this source, when it creates something, it does have some independence from its source. It's only Yesh Mi'ayin that has absolutely no independence from its source. In the process of Yesh Ilu B'Olu, whatever's being, like I told you, let's say the Mashal Alter Rebbe gives, that you take a piece of metal, a piece of gold or silver, and you create a menorah, that's Ilu B'Olu. I took a gold and I created a menorah. The menorah could continue to exist without its source. So over there, we can't say that you can't attribute its existence to itself. You could, because the menorah now exists, because the potential for the menorah existed before this man who created it. All I did was take the potential and develop it, but it was there before. So if I take ink and I make a picture on a piece of canvas, again, the potential that ink could be drawn into such a form, which would be a beautiful picture, was there before me. All I did was take it out of its potential. Or like I said before, with the fire, if I take a piece of metal and I strike a stone and a spark comes out and lights a fire, the reason why this fire can exist without it, because I didn't really create it. It was already there. All I did was strike it to bring it out from potential to actual. But Yesh Mi'ayin, because it can't exist for a second without the source, there we can say that its existence does not belong to itself at all, only to the source.
Okay, two things. First, in the system of Yesh Mi'ayin, nothing can have independent existence. But within that, there's Ilu B'Olu, which you can't have something that has independent existence. But like everything's still in the system of Yesh Mi'ayin, nothing is something within that can have Ilu B'Olu, which
right. So generally speaking, when we talk about Yesh Mi'ayin, we're going to be talking about the Gashmistic world coming from the spiritual world. And Ilu B'Olu is within the spiritual realm itself, how one thing comes from the other.
What makes it seem like, so with like humans being created, are we just looking at the current, like the dead fish are, like Hashem's just wearing the world that it's not when it's moving around?
So I don't want to talk about the movement part, because that's now you're going back to the old question, the new question, the middle question of free choice and Hashgacha Pratis. I'm talking about the existence. Let's talk about the existence part. Yes, that Hashem is the one who has his hands on it, and that's why it exists. And the second he'll remove his hand, it will be gone. That's what it means. That it can only exist because the source is constantly sustaining it. And we don't find it with anything else. Person builds a house, he doesn't have to stand there and hold the walls. He lets go, it could still be there. You plant a tree, the seed is planted, now you can walk away, the tree will grow. The baby will be born. The cake will bake when you put it into the oven. It might get burnt, but you can walk away and still everything will happen. But Yesh Mi'ayin means no, it exists only because of the source. And the second the source removes itself, it's gone. So it has no independent existence whatsoever. That's what it means. It's not a true existence. Naturally, once you go by that, that leads us to understand Hashgacha Pratis, where everything exists only because of Hashem. And like I said, it even includes my free choice and everything. So everything is ultimately, and I said that it's a very hard concept to understand. So the way we can help ourselves with it is to give ourselves this rule. Like I said yesterday, if you're talking about the future, think about the fact that Hashem controls everything. I mean, think about the fact that I have free choice. And if it's something that I can do something about it, I have to do it. If I talk about the past, then I look at it with the perspective that everything is from Hashem. Couldn't have happened without Hashem wanting it. even if someone else had their free choice, even if it was my free choice, even if it was my negligence. But if it happened, it's only because Hashem allowed it to happen. And that gives me a more positive perspective about anything that happened in the past. To use that principle to remove my responsibility about the future is the wrong thing. So for the future, I say to myself, something's going on. If according to Torah, there's something I need to do about it, I'm obligated to do about it. I can't say Hashem. So I'm not answering the question, but I'm just giving a guide how to work with the two principles.
So you're getting too stuck on the fish. Don't get stuck on the muscle.
Yeah. Well, I didn't tell you what kind of fish it is. Maybe it's not the fish that you really like. Okay, to be continued.
Thank you.
By the time we finish, I look twice to see that everything is really there. And